My brother, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me on your show.
We are blessed to be joined on Diaspora Weekly by Rutendo Martin Yarere, right?
Correct. Brilliantly put.
Good. And let me tell you, when I read your bio, the part that struck me is that you're an activist for Zimbabwe Unite against US war sanction. Does that accurately describe
That's right.
you? Very good.
Yes,
So let's begin the conversation with Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe has made the news for a long time. Tell us about what about Zimbabwe that the rest of us don't know?
Well, I think what most people need to understand about Zimbabwe is that I would like to look at Zimbabwe as the country that has carried through the dream that Kwame Nkrumah had, which is that of totally decolonizing our nations, but at the same time with the effort to try and decolonize the rest of the continent by bringing unity. And this has been done by the fact that Zimbabwe is one of the first countries in Africa to radically transform land ownership and land reform, and also transform the economy. And this is among all those countries that were colonized to an extent where colonialism got to a sophisticated level, where white ownership of the economy was entrenched and industry developed. Zimbabwe is the only country that I believe has successfully transformed its economy and given land back to its people. I also believe it's also a country that has successfully sent its military into African regions to try and help other African countries to emancipate themselves, to fight imperialism, fight rebels. This was seen when they went into Mozambique and the Congo to try and stop the Congo war that has killed about 6.5 million people. So I would like to sum that up as that's what Zimbabwe stands for, that a lot of people don't understand, and what it is that international media has prevented people from getting to understand about this country called Zimbabwe.
Okay, so it looks like a lot of the bad rap that, and we'll get to your leader, Mugabe, in a minute, but it looks like the bad rap was centered around, when you read on the internet, they say he basically seized lands from white people and gave it to the black people. So let's hear the education about that. Did the white people pay for the land? Because if they pay for the land, then taking it back, you have to go through a process. So tell us how the white people got the land to start with, and then let's see if it was fair, how we took it from them.
Well, the basic principle in law or common law is basically that you can never take ownership of a possession that has been stolen. So we understand that title can never pass on stolen property. So what this does is that it takes us back to the arrival of the white man in Zimbabwe. That is in 1890. They came to Zimbabwe and they started parceling out land, taking land, and giving themselves this land. We got into a situation that Maichi Hombori talks about a lot, which is that a white man would just get on a horse and he would ride, and you get 30,000 morgens of land, and you will also get what was owned or what was in that piece of land. It became his. Stock. They took livestock. They created laws and began to create policies that allowed them to take land from Africans. Initially, they took that land for exploration, for minerals, for gold especially, because of the gold rush that had happened in South Africa. They expected to also get gold in Zimbabwe, which they named Rhodesia. And by name, Zimbabwe was actually Mazimbabwe at that time, meaning houses of stone. They got there, they began to parcel out land and give each other gold claims. And we couldn't find enough gold when the British South Africa company that had made this occupation of Zimbabwe a commercial enterprise couldn't enough money from gold or mining. They then decided to escalate to going onto the land, because what was happening is that black farmers were the ones that were feeding the white people that came into Rhodesia with the food they were growing. And because these black farmers began to sell this food, they began to make a lot of money. And so the British South Africa Company began to look at mining a means and a way to make money and to compensate for this enterprise that was called the British South Africa Company to make money. So they took our land with acts and laws in place.
Okay, so now it looks to me from afar here in West Africa that the story the story of Zimbabwe is similar to the story of South Africa with regards to land ownership. And when you look at the way President Mugabe handled the retrieval of the land, and you look at the way Nelson Mandela, when he finally became president, when he handled it, would you say that Nelson Mandela learned from how Mugabe handled the land issue? And would you also say that Nelson Mandela handled it differently and better or worse?
Nelson Mandela did not take land. What happened in South Africa is that there was a continuation of apartheid in South Africa. I live in South Africa now. Nothing has changed between now and apartheid except the fact that black people are free to go to the shopping mall. They're free to travel without restriction. They're free to drink alcohol and to party. But in reality, when it comes to the ownership of the economy, ownership of factors of production, ownership of land, and control of labor, South Africans are still in basically under the colonial masters. The colonial masters own everything. I think the last time we actually found out that 10% of South Africans own 93% of the economy. And of that 10%, the majority of those are white and Indians. And they own 93% of the economy. And then the rest of the 7% of that economy is now divided among South African blacks and the other Africans. You see xenophobia taking place in this country. So you've got a situation where 10% of the population, which consists of white, Indians, Chinese, and other races, Asians, that are controlling this economy, while black people who constitute 91% of the population are fighting for 7%, which is not enough. So Nelson Mandela did not want to do what Robert Mugabe did. And remember, when Robert Mugabe decided to take land, this was after negotiations with the British at the Lancaster House Conference. And from those negotiations, Zimbabwe was free to take land after 10 years of independence, starting from 1990. But from 1990, Zimbabwe could not take land.
Let's go back. Let's go back again. What was that negotiation again? Could you repeat that?
It was called the Lancaster House Conference, or the Lancaster House negotiations. And what is interesting about these negotiations is that they happened after the black leaders, or let's call them the liberation fighters, that began to fight for liberation. And our liberation struggle was premised on fighting for land, one man, one vote, and freedom of movement and so forth. And so when that conference happened, Mugabe and Zanla, Mugabe and ZANU-PF, and then on the other side, Joshua Nkomo and ZAPU and ZIPRA were not yet willing to negotiate with Smith. They were not yet willing to negotiate with the colonizer, who happened to be British, because they felt that another 2 years in the bush would have allowed them to defeat the colonizer, or the Rhodesians as we call them, and then given them more power to negotiate, take land outright, and to be able to radically economically transform the country. However, the British had other ideas. So they put pressure on Zambia and Mozambique to force Mugabe to go to the Lancaster House Agreement so that the whites could have a bargaining power to continue to control factors of production and property rights in Zimbabwe.
Okay, so after that agreement, what happened?
Right. So the agreement was pretty specific. Mugabe was not willing to accept any elections before one man, one vote, and he was not willing to accept any settlement that did not include the return of the land. So the British,
Okay.
which at the time were negotiating with Mugabe, then said, okay, we will allow independence, one man, one vote. If you are chosen, or whoever is chosen as a black leader by the majority comes into power, we want an agreement that says that land will remain in white hands for at least 10 years so that they can take time to adjust and so that they can have an option for a willing buyer, willing seller for land. However, after 10 years, you can then change the constitution. And when you change the constitution, this would mean that they could change the clause for land that would then allow them to get back their land, and other clauses that also had white people, 20% of the seats in parliament remaining in white hands, that could also be changed in 1990 after 10 years of independence. Now, what happened is Mugabe had then gone into this willing buyer, willing seller, where the government was to buy land. And when it bought land, it was to go on a 50-50 split with the British and her European Western allies. So Mugabe would find a piece of land that is being sold by a white farmer. They would buy that piece of land and they would pay 50% up front. The British and their European partners, Western partners, would then bring the other 50%. That was a form of reconciliation that would allow Zimbabwe to be re-engaged and allow the sanctions that were on Rhodesia to actually then evaporate. Mugabe bought land that was enough to settle 60,000 people from 1980 to 1990 in this willing buyer, willing seller period of time. But there was manipulation that was done by the white farmers. There was manipulation that was done by the white farmers at this time, who actually were the ones that had the board or controlled the board that was valuing land. It was being valued by a private enterprise that continued to escalate the price of land to try and inhibit the government from buying enough land. By the time we get to 1990, they have gotten enough land, 3 million hectares, to settle 60,000 families. They settled these 60,000 families, who a majority of them were refugees during the war, who came back to Zimbabwe and needed land. Now Zimbabwe got to 1990, could now take land and change the constitution. So they changed the constitution in what was called the Land Appropriation Act. This Land Appropriation Act now took away this private enterprise that was valuing land, a government institution that would value the land, and now gave the government the option to compulsorily take land that they want and then give a price that they felt was fit to the farmer. The British, the Americans, and the Europeans were not happy with that. The British, the Americans, the Europeans were not happy with that. Okay.
So basically, Mugabe used the system to retrieve land. It's not as if he just basically grabbed land. It comes to you own this land. No, the government has taken it. Did Mugabe use a government system and not machoism to retrieve land?
Mugabe went by the book, but the British reneged on their agreement. The British reneged on honoring the Lancaster House Agreement, and the British honoring the fact that Zimbabwe could change its constitution, and by changing its constitution, it could create the legal instruments that allowed Zimbabwe to take land as and how it felt fit. And the British would have to meet up with their obligation of paying for a percentage of that land as agreed. They reneged on that.
Okay, so who reneged? I mean, is it so after the British reneged on the agreement? That's when Mugabe changed the constitution. Is that what I'm hearing you?
No. What Mugabe did is after 1990, he changed not the constitution. He changed the act that was called the Land Appropriation Act without necessarily changing the constitution. All right. This act is the one that now empowered the government of Zimbabwe to value its own land instead of having that private white-owned institution valuing the land. And it now allowed the government to pick the land they want to choose rather than waiting for a white farmer to decide to sell land. But there's an important fact I need here. The Zimbabwean government created the law. The Zimbabwean government created the law but didn't take the land. because the South Africans were looking for independence. So they asked Zimbabwe to stop land reform until the ANC negotiate for power, and only after the ANC has negotiated for power, then Mugabe could go and get land. Otherwise, the would accept to give South Africa independence. So Mandela,
Okay.
his coming into power had everything to do with the land reform that happened in Zimbabwe.
Oh, that's very interesting. And so basically, Mugabe agreed to collaborate with ANC on a timetable, so to allow ANC to secure power before he executed whatever system that he was willing to execute, right?
100%. Not only was he allowing the ANC to settle in and get power, he was also deliberately wasting time to negotiate with the British government to give him the allocations of money that they had accepted for the land that they were going to take compulsorily. But the British government started refusing. The Blair government comes into power. They say unequivocally that they are not going to pay for the obligations of previous governments or previous political parties, because they themselves are constituted of people that come from the Commonwealth, including people being previously colonized, who do not feel that they have to honor the obligations of political parties that negotiated with Zimbabwe. So Claire Short, 1997, basically tells Zimbabwe, we're not going to give you money. Mugabe said, it's fine. Your sons and daughters that are on the land, it is your sons and daughters that stole the land. We will simply take back our land by the laws that we've made, and then you have to look out for your sons and daughters. So when Mugabe says that, the Americans, the British, and the Europeans ask for a land conference. And in 1998, they have a land conference in Harare trying to ask Zimbabwe to go back against Lancaster House Agreement. And Mugabe and them say, we made an agreement. We've met our end of the bargain. It's your turn to meet the end of the bargain. The British refused, and land reform began spontaneously with people settling on land, and Mugabe could no longer go and take those people off the land because he had been promising that land would be given to people, and the law existed, but that the law was not being enforced, and they'd waited 17 years and were not going to wait anymore. Hence, the land reform became a spontaneous uprising or a revolution that went hand in hand with the law that the British did not stick to.
Very good. So you live in South Africa now. Clearly, Mugabe collaborated with ANC to make sure that they secure power before he negotiated, as you mentioned. So fast forward, Nelson Mandela became president of South Africa. He did not follow that Mugabe did. In your opinion, did he make a mistake? Did Mandela make a mistake?
Mandela did not do the right thing, because Mandela was more concerned about being called a good statesman West, much more than he was willing to emancipate his people and to basically deliver the objectives of the struggle. With Robert Mugabe, on the other hand, it was totally the opposite, because you have to understand, when we got to land reform in 2007, Zimbabwe's second biggest stock exchange in Africa and the best performing stock exchange in Africa, even performing better than the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. The Zimbabwean Stock Exchange was bigger than the Nigerian and the Egyptian exchange. So at this time, Mugabe had all the what do we call them? The metrics to make him appear like a brilliant leader in Africa. But Mugabe remembered the reason we went for the struggle. It was for the land. It was for economic emancipation. It was for one man, one vote. And it was to make sure that Black people can begin to control the factors of production, because that is what a nation is all about. And remember, when he had these brilliant metrics of having this biggest stock exchange in Africa, one of the best performing economies in Africa, and the best education at that time, he could have simply maintained it, allow white people to continue to control the land and allow white people to control industry, while majority of Black people live in poverty and languish in dispossession. He refused to do that. And he knew
Okay.
it was going to affect the economy.
Okay. So we have
And he,
two leaders. We have two leaders. By your estimation, Mugabe did the right thing, right? And Nelson Mandela made a mistake. Now, sometimes you can do the right thing and end up with results that are not so positive. In this case, Mugabe did the right thing. He incurred the wrath of the West. They imposed sanctions, and Zimbabwe has been struggling ever since. Look at now South Africa. Nelson Mandela, by your estimation, did not do the right thing, but he did not incur that wrath. And now it looks like there's been a steady transition, at least within the short term. Over the long term, who knows what's going to happen? So if knowing what you know now, do you think doing the right thing and obtaining the results that Zimbabwe received was the right thing to do, or he should have maintained the status quo and follow the longer term to achieve his objectives?
I think what is correct, and we need to look at facts and numbers to be able to determine who did better looking at facts and numbers. So let me tell you something that people forget that are more important than GDP and all these other figures that we panty around. South Africa has the highest murder rate in Africa. It is in the 20, if not the top 10 highest murder rates in the world. Why are people killing each other in South Africa? People are murdering each other in South Africa for survival. People are murdering each other in South Africa because every single thing people eat in South African cities has to be bought with money. And South Africans do not have yards, they do not have homes where they can grow their own food. When they lose their job, they do not have an option to go back to the villages where they can survive and eat what is grown off the land. They've got to fight for everything. That's why South Africans are murdering each other. They've got the highest rape rate in Africa, the highest rape rate in the world. Again, it's a form of social disorder that is caused by the status quo of men, women, and children that have no dignity because they do not own anything and they are reliant on scavenging sometimes in order to survive. Now, in Zimbabwe, you've got one of the lowest murder rates in the world. You've also got one of the lowest rape rates in Africa because there is a social order. The family structure exists because even if they don't have a job, even if they're not participating in the economy, always have a way to survive. The education system that Zimbabweans were given allows Zimbabwe to export human talent as their biggest export in the same way that I think Ghana does and a country like Kenya. What this does is even though Zimbabwe is under sanctions, Zimbabweans can survive. They sell their skill to South Africa. They sell their skill to the UK. They sell their skill all across the world. And this enables that country to bust sanctions in a unique manner that a country like South Africa cannot do. And this is why you see protests in South Africa are violent. Service level protests, what do we call the job protests or strikes? They're very violent because survival is a matter of life or death in South Africa. So on that metric, Mugabe has done a brilliant job to ensure that his people survive without killing each other, cannibalizing each other in order to survive. And before you go, this is something I want to say to a lot of Africans who measure poverty by the amount of paper money in a person's pocket instead of measuring poverty by a person has access to production like land, water, livestock, and control of their own labor in order to survive.
Okay, so we know when it comes to those two countries, the migration direction has been mostly from Zimbabwe to South Africa, with you being an example. Would you say that that migration is based on export of skill or just people looking for opportunity?
Well, it's based on a number of factors, and I'll start with the issue of people looking for opportunity. It is based on Zimbabweans looking for opportunity. But what kind of opportunity?
Okay.
Zimbabweans are running away from gold, land, and resources that could make them filthy rich because they don't want to work the land. They don't want to be digging resources. They don't want the administration of advancing themselves with the factors of production that they have in their own hands. The same factors of production, I may add, that Europeans left to come and exploit these opportunities, and they became rich from exploiting the land, the labor, and the resources. Zimbabweans don't want to do that. It's not because they don't have opportunity at home. It's the nature of the opportunity that they don't want. So they come to South Africa. They want to be employed. They want to give their labor to someone. They get paid paper money, and they can consume and buy what it is they want, rather than going, getting land, plowing the land, investing in a borehole, or getting mineral rights and mining. Now, in a situation like that, it's incorrect for us to assume that Zimbabweans come to South Africa because they want opportunity. It's of opportunity they're looking for, much more than looking for opportunity because they've got a better opportunity at home. And then there's the sanctions.
So basically, they're looking for basically they're looking for easy opportunity.
That's correct. As most Africans are doing. They want an iPhone, they want a car, they want the consumptive things of life rather than building things substantial, which can be done in Zimbabwe if one is willing to put in the hard work.
Okay. Now, we know that a lot of Africans from various countries also migrate into South Africa, something that has caused periodic outbursts of xenophobia. Now, when you look at, based on what you described as South Africa's opportunity now really being opportunity because there's no land ownership, then why is basically all of Africa coming to South Africa, to the chagrin of the local South African nationals?
Well, it's the way we've been socialized or educated as Africans. Africans have been taught to measure success in a different to how other races measure success. So we see the Chinese are coming to Africa, to the very same countries where Africans are running away to go to South Africa, because the Chinese see opportunity in African resources, African water, and African labor. Whereas we Africans have been acclimatized or socialized to believe that consumption and the things that we own and buy with paper money are what show our success. And that's why you see Europe being into the countries where they're running from, while Africans are running into South Africa, and yet South African white people are coming from South Africa into our countries. It's a matter of mindset. I myself am a victim of that. I came to South Africa assuming that with land from white people, Zimbabwe will no longer be survivable. I came to South Africa, and ironically, all my friends who stayed in Zimbabwe are doing so much better, and many of them are actually millionaires in US dollar terms because they stayed, they took advantage of rent, they took advantage of mining. They are chrome miners, they are gold miners, they are coal miners, stuff that I could have done that I'm not doing because I was socialized to believe that paper money was more important. Now I know better. But now to go back home with $1 million in the hand has become difficult. So now you stay to try and make that $1 million so that when you go back home, you can actually afford to take advantage of the factors of production that exist.
Because you didn't start from the ground up. Because you didn't start from the ground up like your friends did. Because you didn't start from the ground up like your friends did. Okay.
I didn't start from the ground up like my friends did. And secondly, I got caught up in the artificial economy. So I'm a marketer by profession, manager by profession. That is where my skills are, but not digging resources. That means I'm at a disadvantage when I go back. So I need to up my game and have the risk to be an investor rather than trying to look for land from scratch and trying to dig resources from scratch.
Do you see that the African diaspora, which you are one because you are a Zimbabwean national, you live in South Africa. But when you open it up, you have Africans living in all kinds of places, China, United States, Europe, other African countries. Do you think they are caught in the same situation that you described, that they have to be before they come back home? That was in the diaspora when we need them back home.
Let me disclaimer first before I action. I am not in the diaspora because I'm in Africa. If you believe in the principle of Pan-Africanism, an African can never be a stranger or in the diaspora of the African continent, because these borders that we are holding on to, as Kwame Nkrumah would have put it, are colonial borders in a real sense, independent countries or independent.
Let me just say that you've opened my eyes to a certain definition that I'm now going to sign on. But go ahead.
Right. So I'm not in the diaspora. However, we do have that South Africa is still a colony, and until it's fully independent, it can be considered a European country, and the term that I'm in the diaspora can be loosely used. Right. So the other people in the European diaspora, Africans who are from not only Zimbabwe, but everywhere else, I believe that because of not understanding the value, because of not understanding why private jets fly into Africa and why the richest man in the world, or the richest family, the Rockefeller family and the Rothschild families, all became rich from African resources, not from innovation, not from industry, but financing mines, financing mineral resource control and controlling gold. Africans must start understanding that that which we are running away from, that soil that we hate so much, is exactly what has made the rest of the world rich, and it's what we need to come back to. But when we do come back to Africa, many of us are scared to come back because we do not have enough capital. Us must understand that our capital is not in individualism, but it's in collectiveness, communalism. If we each brought what we have and put it together in a pot with everybody else, we are able to have enough wealth to leverage control of our resources, processing of our resources, marketing of our resources in a manner that will begin to help us to become the value chain that has enriched the Britons, that has enriched the Rothschilds, that has enriched enriched most of the richest families in the world through African resources. And we need to understand. And so we need to...
Go ahead, finish up.
Yeah, so a lot of Africans who are outside Africa who are afraid to come back because they haven't built that big mansion. Africans who are afraid to come back because they don't have big cars parked in front of a mansion in Accra or in Lagos or in Harare. We need to change our mentality, because mansions and cars have not created wealth in Africa. They've made us more indebted, poorer, and it's time that we reverse and begin to build, to buy tractors and buy machinery and to effect production that just utilize our resources and process them in order to be rich, rather than in order to look rich, when in reality we just have many liabilities.
So if I hear you correctly, I'm hearing that rather than wait to have enough as an individual to come, you are advocating that we form cooperatives so that we can come as a group, so that we can do more. Now, if that is what you're saying, then I have a lady by the name Arikana Chihombori-Kwa. I'm sure you're familiar with her.
Yes.
Okay. She has formed an organization called African Diaspora Development Institute that seeks to do the same thing that you just mentioned. What do you think about that?
I think it's a brilliant idea, and I've been following that whole idea. It is excellent. So that I've also been advocating, though I don't have the nature and the gravitas of voice as she does. But as we share years on the African continent, we begin to build on ideas, the same ideas, probably through mental telepathy or some form of spirituality that's beginning to bring our ideas together. So I support what Maichi Hombori is doing. I call her Hombori, that means mother Chihombori, because she is from where originally. And so I look at her as a mother, and I look at her with great admiration, because mothers are beginning to take the role that I think our fathers have not occupied ever since the generation of Nkrumah left us. And so I believe he's on the right track. It is the African diaspora investing into Africa to control resources first and foremost, to create institutions secondly, and to create the infrastructure that we need, not the infrastructure that the rest of the world is creating. We need to create new infrastructure that is environmentally friendly, that is sustainable, and that is built by us at our pace, so that we can begin to build Africa organically rather than utilizing imports or imported technologies in Africa that might not necessarily suit us or serve us well in the long term of building this commonwealth. Okay. So I support that. But more importantly,
yeah, go ahead, finish out.
Yeah, more importantly, our diaspora must not just include daughters who can trace themselves from Africa now. It must include the lost sons and daughters of Africa who are sitting in other continents, have been centuries, have been there for generations. We need to embrace those sons of daughters, many of whom are bitter with Africa because they felt that we sold them into slavery. They were lied to by the same propaganda that says Mugabe took land that belonged to white people, yet no white person brought land into Africa.
Okay, before I go on to, I was going to bring you back to Africa, but since you mentioned our brothers and sisters who have been away for generations, now DNT has been championed, talking, we're beginning the discussion, right? For Africa to issue apology officially to our brothers and sisters.
Yes, and it is applaudable, especially what Ghana has been doing. Ghana has taken great leadership in reaching out to the African diaspora and inviting that African diaspora home. But however, I do feel that Ghana also displays a bit of hypocrisy when we are inviting our brothers and sisters to come back into the African diaspora, particularly African American brothers and sisters, but Ghana continues to give American bases bases on its land. And yet this institution of security is the same institution that is killing African American brothers and sisters back at home, same institution that uses as pawns and soldiers to attack other African countries and other partners to Africa. That hypocrisy needs to be dealt with in Africa. People like Kagame in Rwanda, who continue to kill Congolese people for him and his own people to look good, that hypocrisy must be dealt with in Africa before we reach out to our partners who left the continent under that level of hypocrisy, where certain members among us sold our own people into slavery without realizing that that would send a message to the Europeans to come and eventually enslave us on our own land. We need to get rid of the hypocrisy so that when we unite in truth and not on lies.
Okay, so now I think I missed a part of about the hypocrisy. Could you describe the hypocrisy? What constitutes the hypocrisy? Because I missed that part.
Right. The hypocrisy right now, Africa's greatest threat continues to be the West. Africa's greatest threat right now is the militaries of the West that are beginning to amass themselves through the manifestation of AFRICOM. And we now got the EU starting to talk about creating a military force to come and occupy Africa. And we also have a lot of European countries like already present on the African continent with their armies. We cannot say to our brothers and sisters in America, come back home. Our brothers and sisters in the Caribbean, come back home, when our governments are in bed with the same occupying forces that are making life difficult for our brothers and sisters back home. The same
I got
police
you.
officers that are
I got
shooting them back home, then we allow them to come back to a continent that is literally occupied by the enemy. We also must get
you.
rid of leaders like Paul Kagame, who the West, for him colonizing or assisting in the colonization of Congo, the Congo, looting of Congo for the benefit of the Rwandan people at the expense of Congo, at the expense of unity and peace on the continent. Because remember, Zimbabwe sanctions don't just come to land. Zimbabwe sanctions are more critically because it went into Congo to stop the overthrow of Laurent Kabila by this man,
Okay.
Paul Kagame's and Museveni's rebels
Okay.
that were in Congo. So it's
Okay. So
hypocritical
I,
for
I,
us
I
to call
I
our
have
our
to.
African brothers back on a continent that still has such.
Okay. So I have to ask this question. Nelson Mandela made a mistake. You say he made a mistake. Paul Kagame, he needs to be gotten rid of because he's helping the West loot Congo. You said they're doing the right thing, but then you attach hypocrisy to it. There are many Africans who will tell you
Yes.
that, wait, these are the superstars of Africa. Why do you have problems with them?
Yeah, well, Africans have to be educated. What is a superstar of Africa? A superstar of Africa is somebody who serves Africa and Africa's interests and the interests of African generations. Nelson Mandela did not do that. Nelson Mandela left his own people in apartheid. Nelson Mandela was able to make sure that his family was comfortable and to get a name that was very favorable to white people who only constitute 6% of the population, but he forsook at least 94% of that very same population. Nelson Mandela allowed a constitution to be developed that basically legalized apartheid and continued apartheid under the ANC. And why this is very painful is that the ANC is the first revolutionary black party on the African continent. Probably the first revolutionary party outside people like Du Bois in America for Africans all across the world. But the ANC did not seek to destroy colonialism. It did not seek to destroy imperialism, but it chose to go into bed as a partner of imperialism or a junior of black people who manage other black people on behalf of white dominance. That is problematic, and it is the legacy of Nelson Mandela. Paul Kagame is even worse because 6.5 million people have died in Congo because of imperialism that seeks to loot the resources of Congo. And Paul Kagame has been a facilitator because he has been educated at Fort Leavenworth
How has he
by the
facilitated
Americans
it?
as
How, how has he facilitated it?
well, Paul Kagame, first of all, was trained in Fort Worth in the United States by the American Army. And that institution is sometimes known as the School of the Americas that trains these mercenary foreign soldiers who go and become tyrants upon their own people in South America and in Africa. Paul Kagame became that man that was trained by the Americans to serve American interests. That's why he gets such favorable publicity. And now he got now the West now and again because he's being positioned in a one Africa that will be under his tutelage for the interests of the Americans. His rebels are trained. They trained by the army in Rwanda. They are financed by the Americans and Western countries, and they are sent into Congo to continue to cause destabilization in Congo so that the resources of Congo can continue to be looted by American, European, and white South African companies that are taking coltan, casita, and many other resources, including wood, that then gets channeled through Rwanda, gets channeled through Kigali, and Kigali is able to show a bustling economy, and yet it's a banana republic that
Okay.
makes money from the other country next door.
So now, the AU, the African Union, what's your opinion of them? Are they in the right direction or they heading the wrong direction?
The fact that the AU took off Arikana Chihombori with the agenda that she was driving tells me that they're not in the right direction. The AU right now is silent and has been silent for almost 8 years, 19 years now since the Zimbabwean sanctions were on Zimbabwe. Even though Zimbabwe, just like Libya, is being persecuted because it is a leader of decolonization on the African continent. The AU sat by when, what is his name, Gaddafi was removed. The AU sat by when Congo has been destabilized consistently by Western forces and their proxies like Uganda and Rwanda. These are all problematic situations. We've got a problem right now in Mozambique. Jihadists that are rising up in Mozambique. We've got Renamo that is coming up again and causing instability. We all know the proxies of the Americans. These are proxies and financed by America and other imperialists to destabilize the Southern African region. And the AU is doing nothing. The AU has done nothing about AFRICOM on the continent. They continue to allow American bases and French bases to be established on the African continent without doing anything. That is problematic. So we need the AU to wake up and begin to look at uniting Africa and giving security to the African people.
Do you think it's possible? And we've all seen it all over the world. When someone is on the outside, they look at leadership differently. We've seen how opposition leaders criticize presidents, and then when they finally get the mandate, they see things differently and they start acting differently. Do you think that you might be looking at this issue about leadership in Africa differently because you're not sitting in a seat? And is it possible that when you eventually get to sit in a seat, if you get to sit in a seat, you will see things differently, or you'll be able to maintain your current posture?
Well, first of all, I would never want to sit in the political seat because we're utilizing a political system that doesn't belong to us. So we're going to create the results that were designed by those that designed the political order. So we'll always make decisions that suit.
Such as what? Political leadership, such as what?
Well, let me give you an example. The political system that we're utilizing right now is a democratic political system in which we have the selection of a majority leader that is selected by the majority. That is a popularity contest. It has nothing to do with leadership, especially in a country where a lot of people are illiterate and don't even understand economics, politics, or interest. So those people are unlikely to choose a leader that is going to make sure that they deliver on their national interest, because most people don't understand national interest. And the reason I know that this is the problem is Hitler outlined the very same problem in Germany, to say that a popularity contest where a leader is chosen by people, you're always going to have a leader that is unable to deliver what it is that a country needs. And eventually, when Hitler came to power, he had to break all the rules to deliver to the German people what the German people needed. Irrespective of how people feel about Hitler, he delivered for the German people what has been German people till today.
So
Germany is now a US colony because...
So what would you replace democracy with?
I would first of all look for a hybrid between what it is that made Africa create empires before and substitute that for this nonsense that we have in which Africans have failed to innovate and create empires ever since we adopted this new. You see, Ashanti was not built by democracy in the sense of the European sense of democracy, but this thing that they call democracy doesn't exist. The Americans select a leader who is a puppet to a hidden government that tells him how to run things, control business. That is not democracy. It's a fallacy. It is a lie. And as Africans continue to play that game of democracy, which doesn't exist even in the West, we will continue to bring out the results of failure until we become a little more authentic with the system that we utilize and have a system that benefits our people.
Okay, so now finally, African leaders, do you think they are governing for authentic wealth, or they are governing for the paper wealth that you were referring to earlier?
African leaders, the majority of them are not leaders, first and foremost. They are people who won a beauty pageant, a popularity contest. They were not chosen for their leadership skills. And if they were to be chosen by their leadership skills, many people would not be chosen because their leadership basically is boring and people would not find it interesting to vote for them. So a lot of leaders are not leaders. They are popular people. And a lot of and because they are popular people, they have the knowledge or the spirit to lead a people or to be able to take a people into a better place, because that is not what their vocation, not what it is, that's not what is inside them. So we need leaders. And if we're going to have leaders, we probably need a new system of electing these leaders, or we new system for leaders to ascend. And that's why they destroyed royalty on the African continent and everywhere else in the world, is that royalty used to be led by the human spirit of either dominion or leadership. That's what made a person like cream in milk. We don't have that anymore. So they impose people on us by making sure that the most moneyed person, the person with access to media, the person that they promote the most becomes our leader. Yet that person has no leadership qualities.
Okay, so
and remember, before I go, we start leadership from the grassroots. Leadership does not start in politics. It starts in the home. I come from a country called Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe comes from the word Ma Zimbabwe, meaning house of stone that form house of stone, basically. So what it says to me is that when our country was at its greatest, when it created the Mutapa Empire, which we believe is what Wakanda was basically based on, they built a nation from grassroots, from the people and families building houses of stone that built communities of stone that then built a nation of stone. We need Africa to adopt that, because that's how Ashanti was built. That's how Dahomey was built. That's how the empires of Africa were built, by home leadership. Women that led their children and husbands. Husbands that led their homes. All to build a nation, a society that was able to understand its interests and deliver its interests. As long as we don't have that, and we look at a leader or a group of people called politicians to deliver everything for us, we will never have leadership, and we will never have nations that are going to be proud of, and we will continue to be clients of other races and other nationalities.
Okay, my final question for you. China has been in the news. They've beaten up our people in Guangzhou. They're being accused of taking land. What's your take, and what should we do about it?
I'm very cautious about saying anything about it without a full perspective from a non-organized media and without propaganda. And the reason I stand at that point is I am very partial to the Chinese for one particular reason. Zimbabwe got its independence because of assistance from the Chinese weapons, Chinese trading. And Zimbabwe has been trading with the Chinese ever since 1419, when they came for the first time on the east coast of Africa. They came at a time where they were the biggest and most powerful nation in the world. They never colonized a single African country. Zimbabwe was an empire at that time, trading with China. Today, colonialism is gone. Most of the top 10 countries in Africa that have the biggest economies are big because they're trading with China. Yet when they were trading with the Europeans as their biggest trade partners, they were poor. Countries like Angola, countries like Nigeria, countries like Ethiopia. And so I would like us to be circumspect with how we China. I'm not saying that they don't constitute a threat or they are not competitive with us. I'm just saying they are not Europeans. They've shown history. We must not judge them with the same eyes and lenses as we judge the Europeans, because Africa's greatest threat continues to be Europe. Africa's greatest problem continues to be Europeans. They are the ones with their armies on the continent. They're the ones which actually give Africa its greatest debt that has tied us up for the past. And so I give China a different perspective, and I say I would like more research on China from media that is not biased, that does not have a Westive. And finally, when you read books from eugenicists, people like Lothrop started, they will tell you that the greatest threat to European civilization is a united Asia that raises up the giant called Africa by combining with Africa. So the West has every reason to destroy any relationship between China and Asia and China and Africa because they see it as a threat to their European and Western domination.
This is where we have to end it. This has been fascinating. You've given some perspective that I have to admit I haven't heard before, but I'm telling you, there's been some education in that. And Diaspora Network Television would like to thank you, Rutendo Martinarara, for spending time with us. It's been very eye-opening.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for your opportunity. And I say to your listeners, goodbye. Let's continue sharing ideas because there's different people with different ways of thinking that would actually lift us to where we need to be.
You got it. Thank you.